Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us and being so prompt. We have a big program ahead tonight, so I want to be sure that we can fit it all in before 7:30. I'm Jilly Allison, president of D Magazine Partners, and for today's purposes, a volunteer on the Big D Read Steering Committee. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to Faith in the City, the role of faith communities in shaping Dallas's future, as part of our formal Big D Reads 22 programming. Before we dive into the incredible speakers and program tonight, I'd like to provide a little background about Big D Reads itself. This initiative is more than a year in the making for the dozens of volunteers who comprise the steering committee, our 50+ community partners, our dedicated sponsors, and many others who are in the room today. In fact, if you have a hand in this, again, all volunteer effort, if you could stand up to be recognized, I think you all should. Come on. Yes. Thank you all so much. Jerry. Yes. Yeah. Big D Reads originally launched through D Magazine's D Academy Leadership Program and ran from 2013 to 2015 with the goal of uniting Dallas around a piece of literature. This was originally made possible by a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts and was executed, again, by volunteers through D Magazine, the Dallas Public Library, Communities Foundation of Texas, and many more. Upon hearing that Will Evans, a D Academy graduate who's here with us tonight, his Deep Vellum publishing house was reprinting Jim Schute's The Accommodation last year, we knew that we had to revive Big D Reads for this purpose. Thankfully, all the organizations who have come as sponsors and partners also agreed. The goal of the 2022 Big D Reads is to build on the efforts of previous years, but focus on Dallas and our own story. It's also obviously a work of nonfiction compared to the others. We hope that the accommodation and the 40+ events planned around Big D Reads will educate, inspire, and bring diverse groups of people together across our city to help forge a more equitable future for Dallas. I think tonight is a good example of that goal in action. Now, an initiative like this doesn't get off the ground with a lot of hard work and community support. Again, did I mention this is all volunteer run? It's also not cheap to print 30,000 of anything these days and to produce the level of events and programming that we knew this initiative deserved. So please join me in recognizing our key financial sponsors who truly made Big D Reads possible. Our presenting sponsor is Amazon. Our platinum sponsor is the Dallas Foundation, who's also a key partner in tonight's programming. Our gold sponsors are CBRE and Laura and Walter Elcock. Our silver sponsors are the A.M.E Foundation, the Dallas Mavericks, and Thomson Reuters. We appreciate everyone's contributions and support. I'd also like to specifically acknowledge the Dallas Foundation, the Dallas Literary Festival, and Project Unity, who are key partners in today's programming and truly helped it come to life. Thank you all so much for your leadership and partnership in these critical and courageous conversations. So a little about tonight. I'd like to address two key points of intentionality that Reverend Butler and I were very keen on from the beginning of our conversations about this program. It's obvious by now, but we have selected Christian faith leaders to be a part of tonight's event. Not to be exclusionary by any means, nor was this an oversight to not include others, but because this is a direct correlation and lineage from the players and institutions from the accommodation and the history it discusses. Reverend Butler will touch on the importance of interfaith work and its critical role in our city's future during the second panel. Second, we ask that you listen and engage with tonight's programming from a place of openness and listening. You may not agree with everything that is said, and that's okay. But the goal of tonight is to bring our diverse communities together to talk about our city, the good, the bad, and the ugly, with the intention of moving forward. So please join us as our panelists have with that spirit. Now, let's get the program underway. It is my pleasure to introduce Drex Sawasu, Chief Impact Officer of the Dallas Foundation. He will introduce our esteemed panelists and share more about the Dallas Foundation's work. Please join me in welcoming him to the mic. Thank you.
Thanks, Jilly, and good evening, everyone. I would first like to start off by congratulating the Big D Reads team, all of those volunteers that Jilly was just referencing, on what I can only say is the Herculean task of publicizing, publishing, and supporting the distribution and reading of this important book about the history of Dallas. So thank you to the Big D Reads team for all that you have done to make this happen. As Jilly mentioned, my name is Drexel Owusu. I am the Chief Impact Officer at the Dallas Foundation, and we are proud and honored to be able to sponsor this year's Big D Reads and focus on the accommodation. At the Dallas Foundation, we are committed to addressing historical inequities with focused and purposeful investments. Earlier this month, we proudly announced our first grants totaling $2.5 million to 25 trailblazing organizations tackling and addressing systematic wrongs in Dallas County. This is work we are incredibly excited and interested to continue to build on as we go forward. And we invite all of you to lean into this work, this much needed work, as we all strive to build a better, more equitable Dallas. That said, I especially look forward to tonight's panel and continuing the dialogue on racial disparities in our city. With that, I'll get to the real meat of this, which is that it is my honor and pleasure to introduce our first panelist in conversation here tonight to set the context for the history of faith leaders in the accommodation and Dallas's civil rights history. They will be followed by a conversation about our future, with Reverend Butler moderating a panel discussion with Dr. Robert Jeffress, Reverend Virzola Law, and Dr. Michael Waters, my apologies. Starting with Richie Butler. He is the senior pastor and my friend. He's the senior pastor of the historic St. Luke Community United Methodist Church in Dallas and founder of Project Unity. Richie has over 20 years of experience in private equity real estate investment management. Under his visionary leadership, Project Unity offers community building and DEI solutions through its Together We programs, like Together We Ball, Pastors, Police, and Community Basketball event, Together We Dine, Together We Learn, and Together We Sing. Richie's board appointments include SMU, right here at SMU, Communities Foundation of Texas, TMF, and he is an independent director at the Brookshire Grocery Company. Richie is also married to Naisha Strambler Butler, and they have two young adults, Emily and Ford. I will also encourage all of you to join him and the Project Unity team for a special Big D Reads edition of Together We Dine at Highland Park United Methodist Church on Thursday, September 29th. So please mark your calendars for that. Please welcome Reverend Richie Butler, host and moderator for tonight's discussion. I also have the privilege of introducing Dr. David Wilson. Dr. Wilson is a native of Wichita, Kansas, and is the founding pastor of the Greater Cornerstone Baptist Church here in Dallas, where he has served as pastor and teacher for 32 years. On December 9th, 2018, Reverend Wilson was elected as the fourth president of the Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance of Dallas and vicinity, the oldest African-American faith-based nonprofit organization in Dallas, where he previously served as vice president for 20 years. Reverend Wilson served as the corresponding secretary, editor of The Lantern, and office and property manager for the National Baptist Convention of America International, Inc. for 15 years. He was also an assistant to the Director of Congress and Christian Workers of NBCA for 10 years, and the third vice president of the Dallas Baptist Ministers Union for 6 years. Reverend Wilson is married to Vernita Dolores Simmons, and they have two wonderful daughters. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Wilson and Reverend Butler in their conversation about our history.
Dr. Wilson, it's good to be with you, sir. Glad to be with you this evening. And I think this is an important conversation. And one of the things we talked about was to get diversity of perspectives as we engage in the matter of improving race relations in our city, in our community. And we didn't want to sing to the choir. So with that, Dr. Wilson, should I call you Dr. Wilson, Pastor Wilson, Reverend Wilson? You know, I grew up Baptist, so I know it's, you know.
I've been called worse, so just call me. Just call me.
Just call me, okay. So tell us a little bit about your background and your connection to this work, this literary work, the Accommodation, and in particular your role as today the president of the A.M.E.
Okay. Well, I came to Dallas in the late 70s to attend Bishop College, and staying here and working. I had a passion for the struggle since I grew up in the struggle. And so I sought out organizations that had historical significance and had a track record of being in the fight, fighting for the rights of our people. And as a result, I got involved with the A.M.E. under the late Dr. S.M. Wright, and I got involved in the Baptist Ministers Union. I got involved in those two organizations because I wanted to be a part of something that had some traction, something that had some history, something that was known for protecting the rights of people. And because I grew up in the civil rights, been a part of the times when we were living in burn, baby, burn, been a part of, I'm glad statute of limitations is over, been a part of throwing rocks and throwing Molotov cocktails. I thought I would keep myself engaged. And here I am today.
Still engaged as the president of
until I die.
All right, good. Well, thank you for staying in the struggle, for your leadership and your undying commitment to justice and racial equality and equity. So I want to drill in and ask you, how accurate is the book in portraying Black faith leaders?
Well, one, you have to realize that it is a book that is written by a reporter. And so it is a snapshot of how he saw, not actually historical facts of what went on. And I say that because in some places I didn't think he did the African American pastors justice. But at the same time, I know that he probably couldn't have done any better than he did, because the rallies, the meetings, the services, the organizational efforts that went on during that time, he wasn't there. And so all he knew is what he saw from the outside.
Well, so drill in a little deeper, because I mean, you are part of the A.M.E. and with SM and others. So help us give us a bird's eye view of some of the things that he didn't capture or was not able to quite understand from a Black church perspective.
Well, one, he didn't know about how they organized. He did not know about the structure, about the connectedness in the faith community. All he knew is that because he was a son of a preacher from Detroit, and his father was engaged in the civil rights in that city, all he knew is what he saw with his father. And I take into account, in as much as he watched his father work, he never was on any bus as a freedom rider to go and make a change.
So, speaking, being from Detroit, him being from Detroit, what, can you compare Dallas then with other cities? Because there's this conversation that every major city had its riots, had major unrest, but Dallas didn't. And can you speak to that particular? And for those who are freedom fighters, I mean, that isn't a badge of honor. I mean, there's something about that struggle and forcing, power concedes nothing without force. So speak to that for a moment.
Well, when you read the book, you get to see that Dallas is bad as Dallas was, as racist, as murderous as they were as far as the power leaders. Dallas leaders and power structure had a vision, and they were committed to that vision and working a plan before all of the bombings and the street riots and things of that nature ever came to be. They were committed to their plan to the point that they would involve whoever was necessary to ensure that their plan would succeed. And as a result, that plan, which was all financial, Dallas had this financial goal, and they weren't letting anything, even riots, do it. And so they engaged with faith leaders to make sure that we didn't have the unrest in Dallas that we had in California, in Los Angeles, in Detroit, Wichita, Kansas. They partnered. And so there's a part of that book that I'm at odds with the author, in that it makes it seem like the faith leaders were for sale. And the truth of the matter is, we've never been for sale, but to work our agendas and to put our programs together to provide whatever they were doing, it costs us just like everybody else. At that time, pastors were pastoring churches. They were building churches off of selling chicken dinners. They didn't have members in their churches that could make big pledges. And so to organize an effort to keep a community focused for the betterment of the city, it costs money. And they had the money because all of their movement was about money. So, like when you employ or engage with any consultant, why you can't treat the black faith leaders the same?
So speak a little more to the relationship, and let me ask you the relationship between the faith community and the power structure, the business community, back then. And do you think the faith community made what mistakes were made? What could, if you were sitting in the seat, what would you have done different in retrospect?
I can't say that any mistakes were made. I believe those brothers networked pooled their pennies and did the best they could. You got to look at, it was it had to be attractive to be a part of that process, because when you look at the riots and things that went on across our country, what communities were burned up?
Black and
Our communities were burned up. And you have to respect those pastors for making sure that we didn't do in our community what the Klan had been doing already. Bombing our houses, running us out of our communities. Many states and cities in this country, because of those efforts, some of those communities still bear the scars, buildings still dilapidated, and things of that nature. So you have to applaud them for not allowing our people to do the same thing in our community that we had experienced at the hands of the Klan.
I'm gonna push you a little bit. So what could what I appreciate that point. What could we have done different or better? But what could we have done different? What lessons do you tease from the book? But even knowing the history, because I'm told lessons are taught until they're learned. So what lessons so that we're not repeating those same misgivings?
Well, the only way we don't repeat those misgivings is make sure that there are opportunities and equality at the table for everybody. If you know, Dallas has been built probably the most racist city. If you read the book, the most racist city that you'd ever know. It was the headquarters of the Klan. All of government officials were Klan members. All of the power brokers in the city had Klan cards. And the thing that got me about that is that they said something about that they came with their hoods on and doing what they did with Bibles in their hand. I got problems because that ain't the Jesus that I serve. And if anything, we could probably get on the same page, giving ourselves to be like the Jesus we preach and the Jesus we talk about, which loved everybody, which gave his life for everybody. And so to promote injustice, to promote hate, to promote division, to promote murder with a Bible in your hand, if we can do something different, that's where we need to start.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm a transition and ask you. So the book went into print and then was immediately cut off and went out of print, and now it's back in print. And I'm just curious. Give me your take on why it ended up out of print.
Well, I've heard and been in dialogue with individuals to say that the book went out of print because it pulled the cover off of Dallas. And I beg to differ with that. I think the book went out of print because of the publisher. The publisher owns a company to print whatever they want to print. And so maybe somebody got with the publisher and he didn't do it. I don't believe it was from that power source that sent the Klan to his house and told him, you better not write it. We're not going to produce this book anymore. I don't believe it was that, because he was one of them. Okay.
We've talked about the history and I want to move forward and just ask you, as someone again who's part of a ministerial organization that has, the oldest, most storied, has played a role in quote accommodation, but also advocacy and leading in our community. Where are we today? And as the president of the Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance, where do you sit, and what's the agenda for your organization?
Well, I think we have, as a city, made some great strides. But I think that we fool ourselves thinking that we have arrived. Because on every level of life, we still, in our communities, deal with the racism. We deal with getting locked out. We deal with being treated unfairly in the banking industry. We feel that we are getting mistreated and treated unfair almost on all levels of life. In education, I know that's not the question, but I know this is
You're a
real.
pastor, so you sort of go directions.
I got the mic.
And you're a senior pastor, not an associate.
I've lived in North Dallas, pastored in North Dallas for 36 years. I've lived in North Dallas 42 years. And I can see it coming out of my house every day that we ain't there yet.
Yeah.
I still got neighbors, and I've been living on the street longer than them, that will run over me and not speak to me. There is this myth that you have it better in North Dallas than you have it in other parts of Dallas. I honestly believe people of color are treated worse in North Dallas than they are in other parts of Dallas. And I conclude that they do that because they don't want us there. Am I the right guy for here?
This is a dialogue or conversation, and sometimes we don't want to hear some things, but we need to hear. And also, as a pastor, you get up on Sunday. Your job is what? To tell the truth and shame the devil. So with that, I was in a meeting yesterday at our church. We have what we call Hope Schools these are schools in the South Dallas Fair Park area, and they shared with me the principles that and it just rocked my world. Some of the things that they literally dead bodies in front of the school, having to deal with those kind of matters, and not having a nurse. Think about a school that doesn't have a nurse, and so the principal has to learn how to do injections and do things that a medical professional. So you speak to these deserts, whether it's education, health, et cetera. So what is, in your opinion, what is the role what is the role of the church in today in addressing these disparities, these inequities, as I've just outlined and you spoke, and we all know what is our role, and in how do we as the faith community move the matter forward?
I don't think our role has changed. I think, if anything, we have changed. Our role is still empowering people. Our role is still seeing that people get a fair opportunity. Our role is still seeing that our people get equal pay on the job. Our role is still in seeing opportunities for our community and extending ourselves to be a part of building a better Dallas. Our roles are being of meeting the needs of people, whatever that is. We've had schools, we have had nurseries, we meet the needs of children. It's our role to educate, empower our community and our people to ensure that they become more productive citizens.
Tell me, I'm gonna go backwards real quick, and time is winding down.
Oh
But
no!
let's.
Oh no!
Oh, you just getting started?
I feel my help coming now.
Do we have a musician in the house to get on the organ? And
I got one back there. My wife. Okay.
Talk about the prophetic role that especially in the Black church, the pastor, the preacher. When we talk about this, this prophetic responsibility, we have to speak truth to power. And I want you to just speak to the history of that, and then also I want you to, speak to the next generation of prophetic voices. As we've got some teenagers, some Gen Zs who are coming up, and we're gonna retire one day. We need these voices to continue in the struggle. So speak to the history of the prophetic voice within the Black church, and then the lesson or what message you give to them going into the future.
Our message always has been a message of hope. And our message has been a message of hope hopefully to elevate individuals to the point that they could see the value in them that God sees, and help them to believe that because they came from the hood doesn't mean that that's their destiny. That God has ordained destiny, and God has equipped them with purpose. That we stir up that gift to make them want to come to SMU, to HBCUs, and to better themselves and prepare themselves that they will be able to leave this world better than they found. I don't think our message has changed. I don't think the prophetic calling has changed. Again, I say we have changed.
At this time, I'm going to open it up to questions. So if there are any questions we might have. Yes.
My name is Shana Hamilton, and I am a former member of New Baptist Church, where Pastor Bill is my pastor, and my mom is Pauline Hamilton. So I grew up knowing Pastor Wilson. And you asked a question earlier, the role of the church, and I wrote some things down. And it's based on what you taught me as a visiting pastor, as my pastor as well. Number one, the pastors in the Black community always wanted children to be educated. Number two, use our Bibles as a guide through life. Every time I had a problem when I went to my pastor, I would look at the Bible. Each and every. So that's what you all taught me. Number three, bring others to Christ so that they may know the gospel. We need to make sure that we're bringing others so that we can build a better community. Again, that's what you all taught us as children in the community. And my last was represent the church so that others would want to be a part of the church. And as my mom would say, someone is always.
Amen. Tell your mother hello for me.
She's thank you. She's an example that someone's watching you.
And I'm very much aware of that. Amen.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Hello, I'm Reverend Dr.
recession co-pastor of the Gathering of Church in Dallas, Texas. And my question has to do with being, you asked the Reverend about being the prophetic voice. And what I heard you talk about was almost turning it in on the Black church as if we were the problem that needed to be fixed. And so I'm wondering, where is the prophetic critique of systems and structures in the city? That is a role of the prophet, right? To bring critique, to speak truth to power, to the system, to the unjust systems that the people of God are living in. And so I wanted to hear you speak about that, and I didn't. So I want to know, where is that prophetic critique? Where is that prophetic voice in Dallas to the unjust systems that currently continue to perpetuate injustice and inequity in our city? There's research that bears out that Dallas is one of the most, if not the most, racially unjust, inequitable cities in the nation. And so that's kind of what I want to hear.
Okay. Well, that prophetic voice is something that I do all the time. I'm at City Hall, standing against issues, pushing issues. I'm in governmental agencies. I'm in senators' offices. I'm in council people's office. I'm at the school board. Okay. Okay.
That was, you asked a general question, not about you specifically.
I think that we need to continue. I know for our historical organization, we need to continue what we've been doing, and that is speaking truth to power. We need to bring young people with us. We need to help them to see how important it is that we speak truth to power. We need to help them understand that if we don't, nothing will change. And then I got to say this. We have a responsibility as Christians to make sure that we vote. You want to speak truth to the power now, get to the ballot box and let your voice and your vote make a difference.
All right. I think, do we have time for one more? Are we good? Okay. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I haven't hooped yet.
All right. Why don't we give a round of applause to Dr. David Wilson. Our second panel, we talked about the past. The focus was on the past. Our first panel conversation with Dr. David Wilson. This second panel is about where are we going as a community moving forward. And so I want to introduce our three panelists. And what we did in selecting the panelists, we wanted some diverse perspectives that'll be brought to the conversation. And so I want to invite Dr. Robert Jeffress, the senior pastor of the First Baptist Church of Dallas. He's also a Fox News contributor, adjunct professor at Dallas Theological Seminary. Dr. Jeffress is a Bible teacher and host of a daily radio program, Pathway to Victory, heard nationwide, and is the author of 27 books. In 2011, Dr. Jeffress received Distinguished Alumni of the Year Award from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. He also led his congregation in the completion of $135 million recreation of its downtown campus. The project is the largest in the modern church history and serves as a spiritual oasis covering 6 blocks of downtown Dallas. He and his wife, A.M.E, have 2 daughters and 3 grandchildren. Welcome, Dr. Jeffress. Reverend Law was called and elected as the senior pastor of the historical Linwood Christian Church in Memphis. She is the first elected female and African American to serve in this capacity at both congregations. Prior to full-time ministry, she received her Master of Divinity from Phillips Theological Seminary in Tulsa and a Bachelor's of Science degree in mathematics from Jarvis Christian College in Hawkins, Texas. During her seminary years, Reverend Law served as associate pastor of the First Christian Church in Carrollton, and Pastor Law is the proud mother of Jasmine Williams, who has given her the most precious gift of her grandchild. All right, Grandma. They tell me you have children to what? Have grandchildren, right? Amen. And last but certainly not least, give it up to Dr. Law. Last but not certainly least, I'm honored and privileged to introduce my friend, Dr. Michael Waters, to this conversation. Dr. Waters is the founding and lead pastor of Abundant Life A.M.E Church here in Dallas. He is a pastor, professor, author, activist, and social commentator. He has appeared on major media networks and broadcast numerous secular and faith-based local and national media outlets. Dr. Waters' 5 non-fiction and children's books have garnered multiple national literary awards. Get one of his books. Dr. Waters is a co-founder and principal of My Waters Consulting LLC, which provides racial equity training and resources to corporations, congregations, and schools across the nation. A former chair of the City of Dallas MLK Community Center and former co-chair of Faith Forward Dallas at Thanksgiving Square, Dr. Waters presently serves as the vice co-chair of Foot Soldiers Park and Educational Center in Selma, Alabama, whose mission is to preserve and memorialize the civil rights history of Selma and prepare the next generation of activists to continue the fight against racial injustice and voter suppression. Dr. Waters is married to Ulysses Reeves Waters Esquire, and they are the proud parents of 4 children. He didn't mention this, but he's also an SMU man. So welcome, Dr. Waters. I'm glad that each of you consented to join us for this conversation. And we know when we talk about race and we talk about the faith community, it's not always an easy conversation. And so I want to thank you for joining us this evening. And I want to lead off with this question. I want to first set this out. We all agree that racism and racial inequity and injustice still exists. I want to make sure that we agree to that. And if so, what is the role of the church in addressing the matter and moving us forward? And the second part of that, if racism is a sin, why can't people of faith rally together to defeat the sin of racism? So I'm gonna throw it out to whoever wants to grab it and run with it.
Well, I'm the new kid on the
I knew
block.
you speaking first. Okay.
I'm the new kid on the block, and I know you want ladies to go first, but I'm going to pass the mic.
Now, this is my new friend here because I discovered that my triplet grandchildren go to Pastor Law's church. Yes, I'm the grandfather of the triplet. They love you. They absolutely love you. They go to her church school and love every part of it.
Awesome.
So, the triplets. First of all, it's an honor to be here. And I'd like to, if I could, take just a moment to introduce our college minister who's here, Jay Sedgwick. And Jay does a great job of reaching college students. And Pastor, I wouldn't be here were it not for SMU. My mom was 15 when she enrolled here, met my dad, and I was the product of that meeting. Well, not the first meeting, but I was the product of that meeting. And so I love SMU, and it's great to be with you. You know, what I would say to your question is this: we have to be honest about racism. And I tell our people, first of all, racism is a sin. To hate somebody because of the color of their skin is to hate the God who gave them the color of their skin. And so we have to be honest and say it's a sin. Secondly, it's a universal sin. It's not limited to any one race, culture, country, or period in history. It has been here. It's a sin that has been battled and will be battled. And thirdly, it's a symptomatic sin. It's a symptom of even a greater sin. The root cause of racism and every other sin is rebellion against God. The scripture says, if a man says he loves God but hates his brother, the love of God is not in him. Our pastor friend here just a moment ago was talking about Klansmen in the city of Dallas who held Bibles in their hands. You can't do that. You can't be a Christian and have that kind of hatred in your heart. And I believe that the Church of Jesus Christ is the only institution that has a message that can ultimately cure racism, and that's the gospel of Jesus Christ. Yes, the legislature can do things, the courts can do things, law enforcement can do things, but it's limited. Only the gospel of Jesus Christ offers the possibility of a transformed heart that turns hate into love. And that's the unique opportunity and ministry we have. And I'm very clear in our church, some of our members have heard me say it. If you hate somebody because of the color of their skin, you're not welcomed at the First Baptist Church of Dallas. Now, that hadn't always been our policy, and we'll get into that later, but that's where we are right now.
Certainly. Thank you so much. I'm very honored to be here tonight, and thank you all for your presence here. This is a very meaningful space and room for me. As Pastor Butler mentioned, we both attended SMU, and I can't sit in this place without offering my gratitude. I saw Dr. Kenneth Hamilton just a few moments ago, and several other professors who helped shape my understanding of race in this nation, as well as race within our city. Also want to honor the sainted memory of Dr. Glenn Linden. I want to commend the late Dr. Glenn Linden, who taught here for 42 years. And I want to commend all of his books on the civil rights movement, all of his books on the American Civil War, the Reconstruction era, and even Dallas desegregation to you. And it was across the street as a freshman that I stumbled upon a book on Dallas history. And in its pages found a black man hanging from his neck at the corner of Main and Ackerd Street, which got the wheels turning, that there's something in the water in this city that needs to be mined out. You asked the question, what is the church's responsibility? I can only speak personally from the perspective of the black church in terms of what we have done to confront racism. We have blood in the game. We have sacrificed. We have marched. We have participated in civil disobedience. We have organized by any means necessary. We have sought to fight against the sin of white supremacy. Now, the deeper question you ask is, if racism is a sin, why can't the church, I guess, have some unity in confronting it? And I think now we've got to advance the idea that we stop talking about Christianity or church and start talking about Christianities in churches. And they are not all the same. In particular, we have to talk about America's greatest Christian expression, which has always been white Christian nationalism, which in my opinion is idol worship. Makes an idol out of the United States of America, creates a white Jesus that has been the most destructive force, not only domestically, but internationally, and is a force that is wreaking havoc all across our nation and our world today. Frankly, the reason we can't agree is because this is a Christian symbol. This is an authentic Ku Klux Klan hood from the Second Rise. of the Klan here in America. And who founded it? A Methodist minister who climbed the top Stone Mountain, Georgia, put down a Bible, an American flag, a sword, and said he heard the very angels of heaven rejoicing as a Klan was begun again. But not only is this a symbol of white Christian nationalism, I like to suggest that there are other symbols that are at work in our country as well. I think that, in fact, this too is a symbol of white Christian nationalism. And I don't see much difference between these two symbols. As a matter of fact, I would suggest that this is the reincarnation today of this symbol a century ago. And so, frankly, there are churches, both near and far, who advocate and express a vision of Christianity that is not the vision of the Christ that I serve, that came to liberate the oppressed. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he's anointed me to preach good news to the poor, recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed to go free, to declare the year of the Lord's favor. I'll say this in conclusion. You know, it was Frederick Douglass who said that he hated the hypocritical Christianity of this nation that would allow the slave bell to toll at the same time as a church bell. He said we have women whippers for preachers. And he rejected that Christianity for a truer, realer Christianity, which I think we must unearth, and I look forward to talking about more of that during our time together tonight.
Thank you. Pastor.
What was the question? I didn't know to bring props, so this is the prop. So defining what racism is as the sin, rebellion against God, and anything that estranges from God and God's creation. Racism is race prejudice plus power. So it's more than the color of skin. It is the color of skin, and it's more. It's the systemic powers that are set up to tell people that they're 3/5 human. It's the systemic powers that took from Native people whose land this really belongs to. Can I talk about it? And so first, we acknowledge this land is not our land. We owe a debt to the Native people. And when we make it just about black and white, we miss it. We have stripped human against human. And in the beginning, when God created everything beautiful, male, female. And when God created humanity, God created all humans beautiful. In fact, in Hebrew, it's especially delightful. Out of the tohu vabohu. Is that right, Nancy? Out of utter chaos. And yet we have spent eons bringing the chaos back. And so racism is just only but one of them. So since you called a girl here, I cannot separate the sexism and patriarchy that's so wedded to racism. And so we create these systems, human against human, when we all just playing God, amen or ouch. And so when I think about the role of the church, it's to deal with the systems. And the reason why the church, in all of our Christianities, don't deal with it, because we got too much to lose. We're going to lose some land. We're going to lose some buildings. We're going to lose some money. We're going to lose. I like my car in my house. I kind of like First Baptist, too.
Come see us anytime.
But I just know the bigger the house, then the more plumbing and roof tucks and stuff you got to fix up. And so I really think that the church is not willing to lose all that we have gained. And so the best way we can go about it is give you this little piece of cash, give you this little piece of land, 40 acres in the mule, and you don't even tell us what to do with it. And so these structures in these yet to be United States were built on the backs of those whose lands we stripped and those whose backs we whipped. And if the church does not address that head on, it's just a country club.
All right. So I'm a transition to a question for Dr. Jeffress. In the Accommodation, the book outlines the role First Baptist played in promoting racism and racial segregation. And I want you to speak to that. And then how is the church confronting this part of its history?
Well, you're right. And it is a chapter in the book, and it's a fairly accurate chapter in what it records about First Baptist Dallas. We were not the only church that promoted racism and segregation, but we were certainly the most prominent church. And now we didn't have any official dogma that said people of different races aren't welcomed here. We didn't have separate drinking fountains. We didn't have separate bathrooms. We didn't have to because minorities didn't feel comfortable. They didn't come to our church. So there's no need to separate people who aren't there. I grew up at First Baptist Dallas. I'm 67 years old. I grew up there. And my pastor growing up was Dr. W.A. Criswell, who pastored there for 50 years. In the beginning, he was a staunch segregationist. He traveled to South Carolina to speak to the legislature in support of segregation. He said things that were horrible. I loved him, but he said things that were absolutely wrong and racist. There's no other way to say it. But the part that chapter washed over is that he changed. And I witnessed the change. I was 12 years old when I sat in the old balcony of the old church and heard him preach a sermon called The Church of the Open Door. It was June of 1968 when the race wars and Vietnam rebellions and wars were going on in the streets. Dr. Criswell stood up and with tears streaming down his face, he said, I've been wrong. I've been wrong on the race issue. And said, from this point on, First Baptist Church Dallas is open to everyone, regardless of race or economic status. And I give him credit for admitting that he was wrong and opening up the church. And the church has continued to remain open and open and open. You know, a few years ago, former Mayor Tom Leppert, while he was mayor of Dallas, switched churches and he joined our church. And he said, I have visited just about every major church in Dallas, certainly every megachurch. And First Baptist Church Dallas is the most diverse megachurch in the city of Dallas. And that's why I'm here. We had some other members join recently from a good church, but it was an all-white church here in Dallas. They said the number one reason we came to join was the diversity. I have a lady right there, Susan, who teaches one of our second grade classes. She said, Pastor, you talk about diversity. Let me tell you about my second grade class in Sunday school yesterday. We had 4 whites, 4 blacks, 4 Hispanics, and 1 Indian. And guess what? None of them got there by themselves. They came with parents who felt welcomed in our church. Are we perfect? No. Have we arrived? No. But we're making progress. And I think it is a testimony to what God wants. Look, heaven's going to be diverse. It's going to be very diverse. We better learn to get along together here and worship together and love one another because that's what we're going to spend eternity doing.
Thank you. Pastor Waters, I don't know if you have a prop for this.
I might.
You might, Doc. You might. The book addresses, Dallas's troubled past history as it relates to racism. I want you to just speak into the status of race in Dallas.
I appreciate the question. I actually wrote a book that came out a couple of years ago that has a chapter in the book that is entitled Dallas, America's Capital of Functional White Supremacy. I believe that there is quantitative data to suggest that Dallas is, in fact, the most racist city in America. D Magazine a few years ago ran an article that said when Dallas was the most racist city in America. But I believe that that is true today. And I believe it is particularly true when you look at race and its dance with economics. So here are just a few realities. Dallas is number one in America in terms of the number of individuals living 185% below the poverty rate. The majority of those persons are Black and Latino. When the Urban Institute did its report in April the 25th of 2018, you know this report, and they measured segregation and racial equity as it relates to financial resource among 274 American cities with a population of 100,000 residents or more. Dallas came in dead last, 274th out of 274 American cities. 40% of our neighbors live amid food apartheid. And it's important that we not talk about food deserts because deserts are a natural occurrence. Apartheid deals with policy. It deals with our historic harms. And so 40% of our neighbors in this city do not have access to quality food in grocery stores, which has a direct impact on their health outcomes. University of Texas at Arlington did a report, and it said from 1990 to 2016, racially, ethnically concentrated communities of poverty in Dallas increased from 18 to 36. There are more concentrated communities of poverty that are racially defined in Dallas than any other city in America. We're number 3 in terms of childhood poverty. 1 out of every 3 children in our city lives in poverty. The majority of those persons are Black and brown. When you deal with the persons in our city who earn $32,000 or more a year, only 15% of those persons are Black. 16% are Latino. As a matter of fact, Black people earn 54 cents to every white person's dollar in Dallas County. 58 cents for every Latino person. SMU came out with a study that there are 62 infrastructurally deficient communities in our city, the majority of which are in southern Dallas, 3 areas of southern Dallas where you don't have access to medicine, to food, to recreation. And this is all a part of a system. That's the Dallas of today. And this is particularly heinous when you consider the wealth of this city. That we make more new millionaires in the city of Dallas than any other city in America, the fastest growing business district than any city in America, the fastest growing arts district than any city in America, and yet a Black man who lives in 75215 has a life expectancy rate almost 30 years less than a white man in 75204. This is the capital of functional white supremacy. And what we got to talk about is why. And I think the church has been complicit in this regard. I appreciate the quote of Dr. King that was used to frame our conversation tonight, but I want to draw another one for our consideration. Dr. King said that the church should never be the state's master or its servant, but should be its guide and its conscience. He says you got to be careful for the church becoming a tool of the state. And I believe we define churches in Dallas over the arc of our history. We have been the tool of the state to simply sign off on the various policies that have literally crushed our people to the ground. And this is not just a conversation of numbers. I appreciate the data, but when you serve in the places we serve, our phones are ringing off the hook daily for people who can't afford to live where they live anymore, who are struggling to find opportunities to put food on their tables, who are making existential decisions each day between, do I keep the lights on and the heat running, or do I get my medication? Hundreds of thousands of our neighbors who each day are crushed by the white supremacy of this city. And what's most unfortunate, and I'll say this in conclusion, is that somewhere along the lines, we thought that simply by having black faces, we were liberated. I would love for us to have a conversation about the Accommodation 2.0. And who are the persons right now who are complicit in our continued bondage?
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to ask Pastor Law a question, and then we're going to open it up to the audience for questions. Pastor Law, you are a newbie to our city. Welcome.
I still have a few boxes I have not packed.
No. We need you here. We need you here. Tell us, you live, in other cities. How is Dallas different or similar to other places when it comes to race relations?
It's cliche-ish, but the more things change, the more they stay. We got a chorus in here. So I grew up in Houston, Texas. Went to Jarvis Christian College in East Texas during the James Beard dragging. Went to Fort Worth, Texas to TCU, and I was detained by police for 2 hours because they thought I was a male rapist. With my head to the ground, they never turned around to see that I was fully female. Some of y'all will get that on the way home.
We got it.
To go to Memphis, Tennessee, who is at the top of the worst list and the bottom of the best list. So when I came back to Texas, the signs in my packed car and the movers following said, "Don't mess with Texas." I forgot about the list to which you speak. And so when I answered the call to serve Northway Christian Church, a church founded in 1906, I'm going to give y'all they had no idea that this pastor would be this beautiful or kissed by the sun. They said I was the best candidate, and that's who they call. And so as I come to Dallas in November of 2018, right after September of 2018, more of the same. This is about the gene. So you talk about those lists, and now I'm in a Park Cities church. I walk around with my degreed self in Park Cities, and police follow me still. I got the degrees and the debt to go with it. And so those stats that you give, Pastor Waters, and the conviction that you share, Pastor Jeffress, this is the narrative of even if you attain all of that and you're acceptable enough, you still get chased down by police as a woman. I thought y'all was supposed to be nice to ladies in Texas. And so pandemic hits, and this newbie doesn't have many friends here. Already struggling because they don't know what to do with the girl on the block. And don't know what to do with this black skin in this predominantly white neighborhood. Literally following me as I walk. I'm just trying to walk away the COVID weight. Am I by myself? And so when we finally get a little bit of freedom from pandemic and we can go, I hear about not food desert, but what food apartheid is in South Dallas, Pastor Waters. I tell my church, we're going to do something. We're going to build a bridge over in South Dallas. They said, how are we going to build? It's going to be an invisible bridge. We're going to do a garden at Greater Garden. And we're going to do something about this food apartheid. Because it's not natural that it takes 3 hours in public transportation for people to get to good food. 3 hours. In these United States, in the city of Dallas. I would also say, as a newbie, what breaks my heart has to break the heart of God. When I see the depravity in our educational system and the way we treat our seniors, and the fact that they do have to choose between food and lights and medicine, and between kids having to stay at home by themselves because their parents are working 3 or 4 jobs. Y'all, that ain't right. There's an African proverb that says, if the children are not well, we are not well. Our children are not well. And the systemic roots of racism and the perpetuation that the church is, yes, complicit, God is not pleased. As a Christian, I know that. But I spend time with all faith traditions because I just want to get a blessing. And so there's a sense that there's a shalom waiting for us, but it's so far away because our egos are so much wrapped into what we have. And so as a newbie, I'm deeply grieved by our city. And I'm deeply hopeful because there's no way in the world that a church built in 1906 would have called a pastor this beautiful. And so the ancestors have spoken to me because that was once plantation land. So as I walk the streets, they tell me, I got your back. You're going to be all right. But I got a couple of folk from Northway. They got my back too. Yeah. And we don't just talk about it because there were people who left Northway because I've been kissed by the sun too long. As sweetly dipped in chocolate as I am, Pastor Jeffress. Because of the systems and the way in which the white supremacy culture has been lied to too. That somehow there's not going to be enough. And this theology of scarcity has us all choked, and it's death dealing. And because I'm Christian, I got to go on and say it. I believe that when Jesus came, that we would have life and life more abundantly. I believe it. I believe that in his death, that he destroyed sin. We just keep trying to bring it back. And I deeply, deeply believe that we will have more pandemics, more earthquakes, more tornadoes, until the quickening of the church responds to these challenges. Because our children's children are waiting on us. I'll finish with this. My grandchildren are 5 years old. Girl. And a 2-year-old boy. And right now they're real cute. But there are systems that are being developed right now that we would spend more money on a prison cell than on educating them. Systems to give them the worst food so you can get them in the hospital and put them into debt, medical debt, that they can never dig out of. And the church keeps talking about how high we ought to go when nobody really figures out what it's going to look like when we walk it out. And so we have another generation college pastor that I talk to these SMU students who've been kissed by the sun, who don't even like white people. We have perpetuated hate in the Black church to white folk, and white folk in the church have systematized this kind of hate. So what am I supposed to say to the college co-ed? They're not wrong. And so you want to talk about living, God loved us. Dying, Jesus saved us. And buried, he carried our sins far away. Well, why we keep bringing them back? When a whole nother generation said, give me something else, but don't give me Jesus. Because this Jesus costs too much. It ain't Jesus I got a problem with. It's the Christians. And so I'll spend the rest of my life sharing the good news and working on systems. So Dallas just passed the DEI, the equity plan. Church, we need to build an infrastructure to hold them accountable. And we've been taught that we shouldn't be in those places. But the White House is messed up, the jail houses, the church house, and your house and my house. The church has a role. And if we don't do it, the rocks will cry out. And I'm going to go on and say it. I ain't going to have no rocks crying out in my place.
Let the church say, amen. All right, at this time, we're going to take a few, just maybe one or two, because we're over our
Reverend
time.
Butler's defense, he did say it'd be very hard to get out of here on time with a panel of
Yeah, I said that up front.
Yes. All right, I have a couple here, and I wish we could get to all of them. I'm trying to kind of aggregate which addresses kind of the key points. So, Reverend Jeffress, this is for you. You appreciate your pastor's confession of what he got wrong of race, and I think we all can acknowledge that it's important to address when we're wrong. Where do you think perhaps you or your church's leadership has gone wrong regarding racial equity? And are there any steps you all are taking to continue to educate yourselves or foster a more equitable community?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, I don't pretend to be perfect. I'm a sinner saved by grace. I make mistakes every day, so I'm not portraying myself as perfect. I sin often, but I don't sin in every area. And so I think as I examine my own heart, I don't think I'm wrong. I don't think that I have any feelings of racism in my heart. Where I think our church has inadvertently perhaps not been where it needs to be, and I'm hoping to get us to be, is feeling like we are aligned with a particular political party. I say to everybody, I am not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I think because of my personal endorsement of the former president, people have felt like, well, that's a Republican church. I disagree with the Republican Party on a lot of things. I agree with every one of our fellow panelists about, I think there is no child ought to go to bed hungry in America. Nobody ought to go without medical care. I believe in universal medical care. I don't believe that everybody ought to have a gun. I just don't believe that. I think it adds to violence. So I think that we have been too aligned with a political party, not by intention, but by happenstance. And I think we and I have to continue to proclaim our stand is not on the Republican National Convention's platform. Our stand is on the Word of God. And so we're going to keep saying that.
Thank you. Thank you. Something I wanted to be sure we touched on, and I know, Reverend Waters, this is something that you have led, but is interdenominational work and making sure that we have multiple types of religions at the forefront of shaping Dallas. Similarly, in terms of alignment, a question we got was, what chance do we have for unity among churches if one pastor holds up a MAGA hat and says it represents racism? How do we include Republican church leaders? So let's start first with interdenominational, because I think it's really important to acknowledge.
And
Jewish
I don't
and
own a
Muslim.
MAGA hat, by the way.
No, thank you, Dr. Jeffress. Thank you.
No, I appreciate the question, the questions, and I'll attempt to answer them succinctly. Personally, I have found the greatest commitments to movement in the multi-faith space. We have found ourselves standing shoulder to shoulder as white supremacist domestic terrorists took armed arms to mosques and intimidated worshipers as they were going into worship. We've stood together at synagogues as there was threats of bombing there. And we have found in our commitment to each other that even our own faith traditions have been strengthened. I think it's very important to reject the notions that have been proclaimed at portions of this city that have vilified whole religions, such as the Muslim people. I find that to be unfortunate that we would have such articulations at this time. And I think some of those articulations have been racially motivated because those worshipers, quite frequently in our imaging, are brown-skinned people. So I think it would be a mistake to act as though our denouncements, some denouncements of the Muslim people, were not racially motivated. Now let's be very clear. And I want to be very clear, and I'm glad to be as clear as I possibly can be. This is, in fact, I'll stand for this. This is, in fact, a white supremacist symbol. There's no question about it. Persons who wear this hat and promote this ideology are promoting white supremacy. Yeah. There is a direct through line in the very statement that goes back to political campaigns reaching back to the 1950s. It was no mistake. And when you have persons who have donned this hat and championing this ideology that have called Latino Americans rapists, who have supported policies that have placed children in cages, that have called SOBs, black people who dared to kneel as they were fighting for their right to live. There is no question that this is an image of white supremacy. There's no question that the policies that support it are white supremacist in nature. And I think it would be derelict in our responsibility if we did not acknowledge that as truth. That also connects to Dallas. There's a reason why more persons from North Texas went to the insurrection on January 6th than any other region in this country. There's a reason why there are 3,300 Oath Keepers in the state of Texas. There's a reason why there are more white supremacist organizations in the state of Texas than any other place. There's a reason why a young man from Allen, Texas drove 10 hours, 650 miles to murder 23 Latino Americans, shoot 46 as they were simply shopping in a Walmart. And so here's the problem, because I appreciate the question and I want to engage in the dialogue. Bible says that the truth will set you free. And as long as you are willing to hide behind the lies that motivate your intent, then we can never move forward. I told you I had another artifact that I want to share with you. These are authentic auction chains from Charleston, South Carolina, where some 40 to 50% of my ancestors entered this country in bonds. I took my family to Charleston, South Carolina, to the old slave mart. And I stood in a room with our 4 beautiful children. It was the very room that families were sold apart from each other. Pastor Butler, I rolled my youngest son, 1 year old, over to the display for the shackles that were fitted for toddlers. And we stood together in that room, and I asked my oldest son to find his age on the board, as he's turning 16 next week, to discover that persons between the ages of 16 to 23 would reach the highest price at the auction. And I wanted him to discern the ways in which the bondage of black bodies continues to be profitable in America today. And I told my children, had we been here just 2 centuries before, this would be the last time that we would see each other. These are the chains of W.W. Wilbur, a slave seller in Charleston, South Carolina. It reads on one side, Pastor Butler, it says strong, healthy African Negro. Lot number 32. W.W. Wilbur, slave seller, 1806. Now, why do I hold these chains? Well, if you think these chains are irrelevant in 2022, you don't understand what's really going on. As a matter of fact, and I'll conclude here, our dear colleague mentioned that her church is located on a former plantation. The reality is the Caruth plantation extended from Northwest Highway almost to downtown. We are standing right now on the part of the Caruth plantation. There's a reason it's called Southern Methodist University. That's right. There was a certain philosophy that was endorsed here. We're standing where enslaved persons used to work the ground. As we talk about race and economics, it is of no mistake that the land of the former Caruth plantation comprises the greatest mass of wealth in the entire city of Dallas. That means that generations later, the haves and the have-nots is determined by who wears the chains and who puts them on. And as long as we're unable to see the through line from the chains to the hood to the hat, we'll never be free.
I want to thank all of our panelists on this evening. I know y'all I want to give it up one more time to all of our panelists for their time on this evening. Thank you very much. At this time, I'm going to introduce Dr. Sandria Smith, who's a professor here at Southern Methodist University in the English department, and also chairs and the founder and leader of the Dallas Literary Festival. So why don't we give it up to her? She's going to close us out on this evening.
Let's give it up to them once again, like they love. Can you hear me now? Okay. So nobody ever said life was fair, and it's definitely unfair that I have to come behind this panel. My God. But if you give me 2 minutes, and I'm not a preacher, you can believe that. I'll give you the closing remarks. When I started to writing these remarks, I thought that I'd written, being from a small town in the Arkansas Delta, I am not supposed to be here. But First Lady Michelle Obama dispelled that narrative for me last week. So tonight, I'm excited to be here and excited to give these closing remarks and excited that you came into my home. And I say my home because my office is on the second floor and I teach in this building, for at least for tonight. First, I would like to thank SMU, the SMU Dedman College of Humanities and Sciences, the Department of English, especially Daryl Dixon Carr, who when he offered me this job said that he was just giving me a bigger platform to do what I was already doing in the community. But I don't think he thought that I would grow it this fast. A heartfelt thanks to our sponsors, and we wouldn't be here without the tireless work of Jilly and Christine Allison and D Magazine. A special thanks to Will Evans, my Dallas literary partner and publisher of Deep Vellum Books and Publishing, and to is Will still here? And to Jim Schultz, the author of the Accommodation. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Black people of Dallas who lived during and is still living under the conditions of the Accommodation. Also, thanks to the panel for being so courageous and for being courageous enough to have this conversation in public. And especially my pastor, even before I joined this church, Reverend Richie Butler. To think a book is the reason why we are here tonight and throughout the month shows how significant it is to be able to read and comprehend. In my life, reading has always been essential. The first word I read was from the Bible, long before I was able to comprehend what I was reading. It was also where I saw my name written for the first time, where my grandmother had added my name to the family tree. The first 2 books I owned were the Bible and a partial set of the encyclopedia up to the letters P or Q, can't remember, because I left for college before my mom could purchase the complete set. Because I started reading at an early age, I learned to love reading. And it has taken me 90% of the places I read about, I've been to. Take a minute and think about what being an avid reader has done for you. If reading has led me to places all over the world, what do you think it would do for our young people today? Which brings me to the momentum garnered with this book, The Accommodation. Remember, it is this one book is the reason why we are here tonight. And I encourage you to keep this momentum going. We, the Dallas Literary Festival, have already started planning. This was our first event partnering with Big D Reads. And we hope that Let's see. And we hope that you will take part in and open the book tonight. You will see this will tell you how to join the Dallas Literary Festival. This March 2023, it will be for 2023, it will be March 3 and 4. And like Victory Reads, we plan to have events leading up to the festival. We hope to have St. Marshall. Her book pub day is today. Let's give her a hand. And for you, those of you don't know, St. Marshall is the CEO of the Dallas Mavericks. I believe that if we had the right marketing plan behind reading, as the social media platforms have, we will see people with their heads in a book like they are in their phones. If you think about it, Instagram has returned us to communicating with pictures and symbols similar to the way it was in circa 600 to 500 BC. I believe that one word, one sentence, one paragraph, and then one book at a time can change lives. My hope is that you will take the flyer in this book and use it to join me in the Dallas Literary Festival in the fight for literacy. I'm passionate about literacy because approximately 90% of our incarcerated are illiterate. And this festival's way of decreasing our incarceration rate is with the Dallas Literary Festival. Please use your flyer and join me. Thank you all for coming out tonight. My heart is touched by looking out and seeing this diverse audience. And thank you very much to the panel again. Yes, ma'am.
I really want to say this to people of color and Black people in particular. When reading The Accommodation, my pastoral heart says to you, get therapy, build some recovery time. For each page is trauma. And so I would be remiss if I did not send healing energy back to all who have gathered here, of all different faiths, of all different hues and orientations, that you may be restored, because it is God's will that every need be supplied. And so read the work, but build space for recovery.
Thank you. I also want to say that The Accommodation is one author's perspective. And so continue reading, continue listening to different perspectives like we did on this panel tonight. So many people have something to say about racial inequity. And continue reading, continue writing. I don't think enough books are being published by the people who are living the experience.